Hey everybody, and welcome to The Musician's Musician. I am your host, Nick Costa, and today we have an awesome chat with my pal, Andy Ulseth. Andy is a fellow songwriter from the Twin Cities, and if memory serves me right, I officially met him doing a show for something called So Far Sounds a long time ago. So Far, if you don't know, is a company that puts on shows in non-typical venues like living rooms, or one time I played a furniture store. They're really cool, actually. He was in a group called Fair Oaks, and I fell in love with the wildly pop-sensible indie folk tunes that he was writing. After that, Andy and I bonded over our love of the Beatles and our similar fandom to Weezer, among many other things over the years. Andy's albums, titled Broken Bones Redux and How We've Changed, are both continuations of kind of that song style that I was talking about before. It's like if Fleet Foxes were more influenced by McCartney's tunes than the Beach Boys or medieval madrigals. There's a real honesty and beauty to his songs that I just really love, and it sounds so familiar, but it also just sounds very Andy. His voice is like meeting an old friend at the bar. I don't know. I highly recommend checking out his tunes, especially since he has some new ones coming out that we talk about. A few quick side notes here. One, unrelated to the episode, but I'm putting out a new single next Friday on March 7th. I'm very excited about it. It's the first time I'm officially mentioning it. The song is called Thunder, and it's the first song from my new record titled When the Lights Go Out. It's an album I've been working on for about 3 years, which is by far the longest I've worked on anything. Trevor Wagen did some killer orchestral arrangements on it. The Love of My Life, Charlie Finnegan, sings on it, and Brady Moen of Midwestern Records not only mixed and mastered it, but he really took this project under his wing. He really believed in this after just hearing one single song that Jacob Pavic was recording piano on one day, and I'm really happy he did. It's the best record I've ever made. I'm so stoked to be putting these songs into the world finally. It also features folks like J.T. Bates, who's another Minneapolis musician who's played with he's played on Taylor Swift's albums and Ed Sheeran's albums, but also with like Andrew Bird, and he's currently playing with Bonnie Light Horseman. So, I mean, he's just an incredible drummer. I also had Kat Popper play a couple songs on bass, who's played with like Levon Helm, Willie Nelson, just to name a few. So obviously I'm a little excited about that. Aside from that, the second thing I wanted to say was that I unfortunately had a lamp plugged in while I was recording this episode, and it caused a pretty insane amount of like buzz noise on my mic. As you can hear now, I found the problem and I fixed it, but I'm afraid I couldn't do too much to mix it out of the interview. So when Andy is talking and I shut my yap, it's gone. So we can at least enjoy what Andy has to say. But I just wanted to acknowledge it because it's hard to ignore. And I'm really sorry to you, and I'm sorry to Andy for that. It is a great chat regardless. So I just really urge you to listen past it. So with all that being said, let's get into it. I am here with Andy Ulseth. Andy, thank you so much for being a musician's musician.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to talk about the Decemberists and specifically this album, Picaresque, which I don't know if I'm saying that right or not.
That's right there. Yeah.
I got it right here. But before we get into that, what is new with your tunes?
Oh man, I've got a lot going on right now. I haven't been playing as much since I had kids. I have 2 kids, 4.5 and 2.5, but I've been writing a lot and recording a lot. I've got one record that is being mixed currently by Dave Mailing. Do you know Dave?
Yeah, absolutely.
So he and I are working together on a thing, and he's mixing some tunes that I recorded at home. And then there's another record that's like a little bit more organic, a little bit more sort of like acoustic, I guess you'd say, with, Eric Carlson. He's a good friend of mine. He and I have collaborated for a really long time. We were in like Fair Oaks together.
Sure. Yeah, I think I do then. Yeah.
I'm sure yeah. And so he and I have got this thing. So I've sort of got these like 2 projects in the works in various states of completion. But I don't feel like I'm totally like dormant, despite the fact that I'm not, out at the bars late at night playing games to people. as a
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like there is an element of that that's still important to an extent, but I think kind of there's a positive and a negative side of like the state of the music industry right now, where it's like you don't really have to burn yourself out with live shows these days because everything is so readily available if you're pushing out content, right? Which is like,
that's right.
Sucks, but also for people like us who like don't really maybe want to play at bars every night, or we can't, yeah, it's just not.
It's like that's exactly right. It's a total double-edged sword, and part of it's like post-pandemic, post-kids, post. Becoming like entering my late 30s. Like, it's sort of like, is it any one of those things individually, or is there just like a malaise that occurs from playing live for so long, like 20 years or whatever?
Yeah.
And just like the rigmarole. We did it last night. I played a show last night and it was great at the Astor Cafe. We had so much fun. But like on the way there, I was like, wow, I was all so grumpy. I was so grumpy on my way. I was like, oh, why am I doing this anymore? This isn't. And then I get there and they say, go ahead, and you start playing and it's the best.
Yeah.
But until that, it's like, you're lugging crap and you're whatever. It's just whatever. Yeah. It's not what you envisioned when you were 18.
No. But also like, I don't think I could do physically what I envisioned when I was 18 anymore.
No.
No.
But think about like traveling in a van or a bus, like.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah. I mean, back when I was doing music full time, I would have to like count the shows for like tax reasons, right?
Oh yeah. Yep.
And I was doing like, 300 shows a year. And I'm just like, how did I do that? And like maintain any semblance of sanity.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think I remember when you were sort of in that phase. I mean, it just like, seeing you on social media and just be like, dude's a grinder. Like, holy hell.
Yeah.
Like, that's what you do. You're out there just grinding. And it's super admirable and it's super cool. And I mean, you achieved some cool shit because of it. But like, just being indisposed or being uncomfortable for that period of time is like something I'm not interested in doing anymore.
No, and it's not necessary anymore. I really don't think it is. So, and thank goodness. But anyway, but that's really exciting so you got 2 records and they're like,
kind of
done.
It's one is like 90+%. The other one's probably like 85%. And then I've just got these other like pet project things that I've just like been hacking away at for years. Like, you might have like songs that you've had for 15, 20 years or whatever.
Yes.
And they never quite made a thing. Like you never quite did like, and I've thought like, what if I did something just with those just to sort of get them off my mind? But like, I don't know if that's necessary. Some of that's just like, culling the fold, as it were.
Yeah.
That's an Easter egg.
Sometimes
Decemberists.
Oh yeah. Sometimes you just have a tune that's like, it's good, but it just didn't fit on this project. And then that goes into like this folder. For me, it's like a list. I have a list of unused songs in my phone. Yeah. And it's just this ever growing thing where I'm like, I have this album, but that's not going to fit on this album. So
yeah. Totally. And then it's like, and then I sort of was like, what if like the theme of this thing was the fact that they were all disparate ideas? Like, it's like nothing really needs to fit. They're just like, this is my scatter shot. Like, I hesitate to call it like B-sides because they're not B-sides to anything, but like sort of like conceptually B-sides.
Yeah. Oh God, who did this recently? There was somebody, and I always like tend to think of like, the first one that comes to mind is Green Day, and I don't think that's right. But like they had a B-side record that people are like, it's so good, even though it's disjointed. Like the songs are so good that it's like, who cares?
There are bands that do that. I know a band that we both share, I believe, a large fandom of. If you go back to like 90s Weezer,
oh yeah,
all the B-sides are crazy. Like they're crazy good songs. Like all the B-sides from Blue Album, Pinkerton. Even Green Album, I know you love Maladroit, which...
Big Maladroit guy.
Huge respect for you for that. I
Love
don't,
that journey.
That sounds like I'm condescending to you, and I am, I promise. But like, I have fondness for that record. But like some of those B-sides, and even I guess Green Album too, like they just crushed with some of those B-sides, like shockingly good songs.
Oh yeah.
So
Big agree.
I think that like just because something isn't on a record or isn't put in a collection of songs like officially doesn't mean it's less of a song or like less of like a great work of art or something like that.
Yeah.
Because like there's some like just kick-ass stuff that's never made it onto a record for whatever reason for any artist.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Heard and agreed. Weezer is such a good example because, I feel like for every 10 songs they release, there's like 30 B-sides.
Yeah.
And like,
so,
sometimes you don't need to hear them, but a lot of times they're good.
I remember when they were, this is turning into Weezer. This is about like
every episode has turned into Weezer.
But like, I remember when they were doing Maladroit, which came out when I was a freshman in high school, and I was on the message boards, and they were releasing the fresh rough mixes every day. Are you aware
that's
of this?
right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And there was like 20-ish songs, and it would be like, they'd release them and people would like be like, oh, I like this version, I don't like that version. And then they'd sort of, the next day you'd say like, oh, they didn't do a new version of this one yesterday, so maybe they're not doing that one anymore. Yeah. And so by the time this thing came out, I was so familiar with the songs. I mean, a lot of like deep fans were, perhaps you were, and they were sort of like maybe the 5th, 6th, 7th incarnation of the songs by the time you got the official record. Right. There's really never been an experience like that I've had. No. And that like early 2000s Weezer fandom felt so fun at the time. I now look back on it and I'm like, sort of like a toxic fan relationship with how they made that record. But there's some good tunes on Maladroit for sure.
Oh man, I adore that record, but I won't. We don't need to get too into Maladroit. There needs to be somebody's got to pick up Weezer for one episode, but that is a different time.
I would love to come back and do a Maladroit specific episode with you someday.
You know what? I would do that. And I would be happy about it. But that's not this episode.
Okay.
This episode is the Decemberists, and I mean, speaking of early 2000s, I guess they've been around since I think their first record was 2003.
Yeah, Castaways and Cutouts.
Yeah. Do you remember the first time that you heard the Decemberists?
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I took notes because I wanted to like get all this out. And it was, so I was like big, like I was like an online kid, like an online music kid, as I said.
Totally.
And I remember someone had sent a link or posted a link somewhere that was like, check out this band. And it was a link to the Kill Rock Stars website. And there was 2 MP3 links, like downloadable songs. And there was Here I Dreamt I Was an Architect from Castaways and Cutouts. Which to me is like still maybe one of the best songs that they've ever done, and maybe one of my favorite songs of all time.
Sure.
And then a song from their second record called The Soldiering Life, which was also very good. Just like, and I remember being like, this is like a whole new aesthetic. Like, I feel like now we sort of look back at like the folky, tropey sort of like pirate sea shanty music, like it was a thing, right? Like Mumford and Sons and the Lumineers, and but like 2003,
that wasn't around.
Like, no, and it was so cool. It was like, you can do this, like you're doing this thing with those instruments and like singing like that. So I remember being really enamored by these 2 songs, and I think I burned them on CDs or whatever for a long time. And then would have been spring of 2005. I was a senior in high school, and I was at Best Buy with a friend of mine, and we used to go and like just buy CDs sometimes.
Oh yeah.
I saw the Decemberists, and I was like, these guys are big enough to be sold in a Best Buy.
Yeah,
like in my head, they were sort of like, I knew that they were contemporary, but I thought they were sort of like this, like these guys are crazy off the grid. Like they're so off the beaten path of popular music that like no one knows about them.
Yeah, for sure.
And to see them at a Best Buy, it was kind of like, oh shit. So I bought Picaresque, and to my, I loved it. I still love it. It's the best, sort of most fully distilled Decemberist record to this day.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, which is why I wanted to talk about it. They also did an EP just prior to Picaresque called The Tane, if you've ever heard that.
I haven't.
It's like a 5-piece song cycle.
Okay.
That is beautiful. It's so good. It's similarly produced and engineered. It's good. It's really good.
Interesting. Oh yeah, I'm seeing that too. Was that also Chris Walla produced?
Yeah, it was.
Oh wow, it's one song and it's 18 minutes. That sounds like great. The Decemberists. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. And I wanted to talk about that Chris Walla thing too, especially from that like early 2000s connection. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you feel this way too. So like, I love Death Cab. I think Death Cab's a kick-ass band.
Yes.
But in my head, the Decemberists and Death Cab for Cutie do not occupy the same space.
Interesting. Because I was just saying this morning that I thought of them as like very similar, not in so much like sonically. I don't know how else to say it other than just like vibes.
That's so interesting.
Like there's
I've always been like Death Cab is sort of like airtight productions.
Yeah.
Super tight. Mm-hmm. Super clean. Songs that are sort of like emo kid songs, like great songs, but songs that were like on the OC, right? Like that's sort of the thing. And the Decemberists always felt like this band. Again, I early on thought they were like some like off the grid folk artists living with like dirt on the tracks kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when I initially had heard that they were sort of like in cahoots together as bands, I was like, wait, what? Like, it just didn't jive to me. And so the fact that Chris Walla not only was in their scene, but also produced some of their best work, in my opinion. I believe he did The Crane Wife as well.
Okay, cool.
The next record too.
Yeah.
And but yeah, like to me, that's such a funny. I still like even to this day, 20 years later, I'm still a little bit like, where did that come from? Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense in my head yet.
Sure.
So,
yeah. So. I think for me, I like made the connection because I think I heard like Red Right Ankle.
Yeah.
And The New Year by Death Cab, like around the same time.
Yeah.
And like their voices are just like I feel like Colin Malloy's voice is like he listened to Neutral Milk Hotel a little bit more than Ben Gibbard, but like that's where the separation happened. You know what I mean?
That's very interesting. Yeah. Like it's, I get it. I mean, like there's certainly a lot of people out there who feel like they are the same, cut from the same cloth. And I love both bands so much.
I think that they're like very distinguishably different.
Yeah.
You know, but they're, for some reason in my brain, it's like Pacific Northwest indie band. Yeah.
One feels digital to me and one feels analog.
Yes, absolutely.
And it feels like two wildly different aesthetics. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the interesting thing.
I don't want to hear Death Cab for Cutie sing an 8-minute song about a whale. You know, like that doesn't sound interesting to me. The Decemberists.
Yeah.
Now I'm in.
Death Cab would do a song like Decemberists do a song like an 8-minute song about being stuck inside the belly of a whale, and Death Cab does like a 6-minute song about being like breaking up with your girlfriend in like the backseat of like a hatchback.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Like, during like a snowy day in the mountains. Mm-hmm. Like, it's totally different.
It's a different vibe.
Thing.
Yeah.
Totally different vibes. But I think part of what I love about this record, more so than every other Decemberist record, is like the songs, obviously, the look of it, the feel of it, but the production is like astounding.
It's incredible.
It sounds like if you're familiar with like Stephen Sondheim cast recordings from the 80s,
sure,
where it's like you can like they're doing the dialogue live in the theater and you can like hear like the the reverb, and it sounds really bright, and it sounds like, there's an audience in front of them. Like, it just feels like you're like in a theater.
Yeah.
Not a rock club. I mean, it feels like a theater. And this was recorded in a church,
right,
in Portland.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. That's kind of like the dream, like rent out a cool space for a couple weeks and just make a record.
Yeah. We don't get to do that as much anymore. No. I feel like, No. There's not like the budget. Now people are just kind of making stuff in their houses, which is great. I mean, I do that. So like,
yeah, it's the democratization of it all that is a double-edged sword, right? Like, it would be so cool if someone gave us $100,000 to go make a record and take off, from our lives for a couple weeks and go make the exact thing we wanted to make. But
yeah,
such is life.
Absolutely. Yeah. But there's some real magic in this record. And it's a record where I feel like it's like at least once a year for me. Because I own it. And so like I'll be like going to pick a record and I'll be like, I haven't listened to Decemberists in a minute. Like I'll pop that on and then I put it on. I'm like, every song is so good. And I forgot. I was like, oh, this song's on this record. I love this song. The one that got me real hard today was Engine Driver.
Beautiful.
That song, man, like the way it moves and like that melody is incredible. And like the part where he goes, I am a writer of fiction. Like so good. That part hits and you're just like, oh, yeah. What a great part. Like a little.
And you're like, yes, you are. You are, Colin.
Yeah, that is the most autobiographical thing on the album, probably.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, like I think every song is great. I think every song is layered in, like, there's obviously a lot of like death on the record. There's tons of, and that's like sort of like a prototypical sort of like joke about the Decemberists is like how many characters die on this record, like like how many of them were drownings, how many of them were like murdered or whatever. But like there's like an irony to it, so it's macabre, but it's not maudlin. It's not like or if it is maudlin, like overly schmaltzy theatrical death, or it like there's like a little bit of like a wink and a nod, like
yeah absolutely,
like, can you believe we're doing this? Like it's kind of fun, like it feels like community theater or something like that.
It does. Yeah. Me and my partner Charlie, we were Googling Colin Malloy just a little bit, just to be like, what's this guy's deal? Like I've never really like learned too much about this guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's got a degree in like English and theater. So of course he does. That makes so much sense.
That's totally legit. And like, I'm sure when he was declaring his majors when he was younger, someone was like, well, you're not going to make any money doing English and theater. And he's like, I'll just start the Decemberists.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, that's a perfect usage of those two things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of a super fan of his, and I've been a super fan of his for a long time. And honestly, like everything they've done since Picaresque, I don't hate any of it. There's like a caveat of like, but it's not. They didn't do this well on this record, or they didn't. I don't feel like they captured this magic. And like the thing that I think like I can't not say, and like probably needs to be said with regards to that is like this was their last record before going on a major label.
Oh sure. Yeah. And
because they went to Capitol, and it's like I don't want to sit here and be like they sucked once they got on a big label, because like that I just sound like kind of a tool if I say that, but I guess I'm saying that. Like I just feel like they lost some of the joy and they lost some of the scrappiness that like when you listen to those 3 early records and those EPs, it's like, oh, they sound like a garage rock band playing this like folk music that's kind of funny and dark. And like when they switched and they went to the bigger label, they also switched drummers, which I think like the drumming on this record is awesome. On Picaresque is so good and so bouncy and so playful.
Yeah.
The drummer on Picaresque was a woman by the name of Rachel Bloomberg.
Okay.
And she also sang all the harmonies on those first couple of records. Like that really distinctive, like Decemberist female backing vocal was her. I believe that was all her. So she left the band after Picaresque, and they got the new drummer, John Moen, who was from Stephen Malkmus and the Jicks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he's, by all accounts, a wonderful guy and a great drummer, but he's a rock drummer, man. Like he's like a professional rock drummer. And like, it's, to me, like they just lost a little bit of that like scrappy, gritty punchiness. Yeah. By getting something that's just a little bit more professional sounding.
I agree. Yeah, I think that I feel like there's a little bit of an exception with The King is Dead, because I feel like they leaned into that a little more. Like they leaned into like more of a, almost like a 90s alternative
with sound. Like Peter Buck and like Gillian Welsh and like an REM thing. There's like an REM thing there. It's more
very
organic.
Much. Yeah, and it worked, I think, for that record. Not in the same way that Picaresque worked.
Yeah.
But like it was like I remember being like, all right, I get it. Like after Picaresque, I was like, all right, I get it. Like I liked O Valencia, and like, you know, there would be a single that came out every now and then. I'm like, sure. But then Down by the Water came out, and I was like, there we go.
Boom. Yeah, that's cool. And like my thing with that record is like, I think the songs are great, but none of them feel joyous to me. Like in the way that like Picaresque feels sort of silly. And that's sort of the Decemberists. Like it's a silliness to it that like really is alluring to me. And it just feels like once they stopped kind of being the silly band, they became just sort of another band. Sounds so harsh, especially for a band that I love as much as I do, but I kind of feel that way. Like Crane Wife is good, but there's not the irony or the silliness or the fun that Picaresque has. And even the earlier records don't necessarily have as much like humor on them as Picaresque.
That's true.
Picaresque does.
Yeah.
So it's the sweet spot for me. It really is.
Even the ballads on Picaresque are sillier than even the ones that came before it. So like Red Right Ankle was like this heartbreaking, very earnest song. But then you have Eli the Barrow Boy, which is like kind of like the, you know, this album's version of it. And it's like a little bit silly, but it's also at the same time heartbreaking. And
it's funny because it's like, obviously it's heartbreaking and sad. And like the story that they're telling is sad.
Yes.
But what's funny about it is you picture like a high school kid playing that character in like the fall musical, like faking their own death on stage and like being really like overly dramatic about it, and it feeling like this sort of like Wes Anderson Rushmore sort of like like kind of like funny sad moment. And that just so works, and they leaned into that with like all their imagery. Like if you like crack that thing open and look at the pictures, it's like the band dressed as like characters in the songs. And like in like a very, you know, community theater-ish way. And like, I was so taken by that. That like, not only are they putting together a collection of songs, like we talked about, like not every song fits every collection of that you put out. But like, not only is this collection like curated in such a way that they sound good together, but they also are curated in a way where you can put together visuals for each song that feel funny and silly and are eye-catching and are witty. I mean, it's incredibly smart how they sort of packaged that thing.
Definitely. Yeah. And I almost feel like some of the songs like jump through time, right? So you have like Eli the Barrow Boy, which I in my brain is like this like medieval era or something,
or like Victorian, you know, sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Or like, you know, like in the distant past, but then you have The Sporting Life, which feels like very current, like, you know, some high school kid or something like that.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah. Like he's talking about like the coach loading the lemonade away after the soccer game or whatever. Like just these incredible bits of imagery that could be anywhere from like the 50s to the 60s to today. That song was such like a meaningful one for me. My dad was a very highly accomplished athlete.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was a professional hockey player. And I was not a professional hockey player. And I never really, it was never even in question that I would be. But like,
Right.
So that song about like disappointing your father on the sporting field or whatever, apropos of nothing, my father was never disappointed in me for that. But like,
Sure.
it is such like a, like as like a kid who was into theater and who was into writing and who wasn't into sports as much, like, that was so cutting to me. Like it was like so funny and I so related to it. And like, that is a pop song on like a contemporary popular record.
Right. Yeah.
And it's about being a kid who's disappointing your dad about like not being able to be as good of an athlete as he is, and your coach like shaking his head at you. Like that is so crazy.
Yeah. And I think I also related to that. So my dad, he wasn't like a professional athlete, but like very athletic and really loved that. I mean, like we grew up in a time where the NBA, I think is still very great. But it's like, we were like in the time of Jordan and like, the Bulls and stuff like that. And my family's from Chicago. So like we were big into basketball. And so I wanted to play basketball, and then I discovered music. And I remember like having a fear telling my dad, like, I don't want to play sports anymore. I want to play music. And like I built up the courage to be like, yeah, I'm not going to sign up for the basketball team this year. I'm actually just like, I want to start a band. And I remember telling him that and him being like, all right.
Yeah.
Do that. That sounds cool.
I had the same conversation. I remember I had told my mom I wasn't going to play hockey the following year. And I decided like mid-season, and they were like, well, you have to finish this season because like you made this team and like, the team's relying on you. And I was like, okay, like that's a good lesson to teach a kid. But like next year you don't have to.
Right.
And so I told my mom, and she's like, well, you have to tell your dad. And I remember feeling so nervous about it. Yeah. And I remember like approaching him sort of like sidling up while he was shaving one day. And like, which is like, it's like a funny image. And like, so I don't think I'm going to play hockey next year. And it being like, all right, what are you going to do? And I was like, I want to do music. Like, I really want to do it. I'd like missed too many band practices because of hockey practice, right? Like I had to miss too many things I was excited about to go to hockey practice.
Yeah.
And he got that. He was just like, whatever you do, just, I want you to do something, obviously. And I just want you to like, give it hell, when you, work hard, try hard, we'll support you no matter what. And like, it's so empowering to have parents who don't have expectations of you towards one specific thing. But candidly, as a parent now, like I'll sit there and be like, we should get guitars for my kids. Like we should get guitars for the kids. It's like,
I don't want to play guitar anymore, Dad. I want to play hockey.
And that will come, and that conversation will happen where my son or my daughter will tell me that they're hockey kids, and that'll be fun too.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
it's just gonna happen.
Absolutely, it's the way it works, right? But that's so funny.
So that song, "The Sporting Life," is super incisive. I mean, like a surgical cut, witty comment on sensitive boy, athletic dad relationships that like is so specific, and it just doesn't exist anywhere else. It's beautiful. It is a beautiful sentiment.
It truly is. There's so many of that, and it's kind of just like covered by this like almost humorous kind of like it's like it's okay to laugh at this, kind of attitude.
The whole record is okay to laugh at. Like that's what's awesome about it. Like that particular song has the Lust for Life drum beat. Like the Iggy in the studio. It's perfect. It's like jangly, perfect. And then you hear this like sort of like story of this like kind of like down in the dumps kid who like can't make his dad proud. And it's like it feels like you're reading a sort of like a novel from like a J.D. Salinger novel or something like that. Like about a character who just can't get it right, and he's angsty about it, and he knows why, and he's too smart, and like it just is it's great. It's so beautiful.
I love that they're able to, I don't know, have something feel so heavy and light at the same time. It's such a gift to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And I think that just speaks to the layers of irony that they built into this thing. Like again, I mean, Eli the Barrow Boy is literally about a child dying.
Right. Yeah.
That's literally what it's about.
Yeah.
And it's not done in a way where you're like, oh my God, I'm watching a true crime documentary and this was a real person and I can't believe this happened. And I can't think about rearing children in this world. It's like you're listening to it and it's sort of so extreme. It's not violent. It's not boorish. It's none of those things. It's beautiful, but you're like, I can kind of jive with this and laugh at how clever it is and how evocative it is and like just be blown away by that. But like, I think that humor is something that they sort of lost later on. Like the King is Dead record that you mentioned is great, but it lacks humor. And like,
yes,
I don't think the Decemberists set out to be a funny band,
no,
or like a comedy band. But part of what made them so alluring to me, at least initially, was this ability to, like capture the imagination in a way that was like inspiring or sparking or something like that.
Yeah, it's a truly unique record, and especially like for the times. Because hold on, let me see when this was released again. Yeah, this is 2005.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So like, I don't know. Let's take a quick look at popular albums in 2005 real quick.
Yeah.
Because I remember hearing this and just being like, this is way out of left field. But actually now looking at it, like you have I'm Wide Awake It's Morning by Bright Eyes. That was 05.
Wonderful.
That's going to be 20. These are all going to be 20 years old this year.
No, absolutely
not.
Isn't that wild?
Whoa. Yeah.
What else are you seeing? Illinois by Sufjan Stevens, 2005.
Yep. We have Talk by Sigur Rós. This is a formative year for me. This is like, this was great. Like the year that like pulled me out of like the punk rock.
Is that true?
I think so. I think I'm Wide Awake It's Morning was the first, because Bright Eyes was like on the cusp of like, you know, the pop punk emo thing.
So that is sort of the similar space occupied by Bright Eyes that occupies Death Cab for Cutie, where it's like you could see like the emo kids, or even like the kids, again, like the OC kids, like into those bands. Yeah. And it made sense and it was fine.
Yeah.
But like I couldn't see like the OC kids or the emo kids being into the Decemberists. But clearly there was a cross-pollination of something and it existed. And I bet you're not the only kid that Bright Eyes pulled out of the punk thing and into
definitely not
the Americana indie thing. Like,
right, because they were on Saddle Creek Records, and so was Cursive. And I remember being really into the album The Ugly Organ.
Yeah.
And being like, okay, well, there's Bright Eyes, and all these people on MySpace love Bright Eyes, so like maybe I'll give this album a listen. And it was I'm Wide Awake It's Morning, and like I don't think I had heard a pedal steel that I liked at that point until that record, and I was like, oh damn, like this is like kind of country, but I like it. And like at the time I thought of country as like my grandpa's music and like Alan Jackson, and like not really my vibe.
Yeah, was that Mike Mogus who played all that?
I think Mike Mogus does to do the steel for those. Yeah, that's
fantastic. Great record. Those like
is it ever?
Even like was the next one Casadega? So they did. Yeah, I love Casadega. I love that stretch.
Yeah. So there's I'm Wide Awake It's Morning, and then at the same time it was Digital Ash and a Digital Urn.
Right.
Very different records.
Right after the Postal Service record.
Yes.
Which I feel like those two records, the Digital Ash and Give Up, are very they're bedfellows in like a very specific like 2003 to 2005 way in which you realized songwriting could be done to synthesizers.
Yeah.
And drum beats. And again, similar to how like now we look back at like the Decemberists, like post Mumford and Sons, post Lumineers, and it feels I think it still feels fresh in a way, but
Yeah.
like at the time it felt kind of mind blowing. Like to look at bands who were writing songs to like beat machines and synthesizers, like that was also crazy fresh at the time.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, definitely. And like
funny.
have it not be like Daft Punk or something like that, you know? Or,
Bingo.
yeah. Because
Yeah.
the same year too was LCD Sound System's record. And like
The first one?
the self-titled, I don't remember which one was first. I think that was first.
Okay. Gotcha.
Maybe not though. But either way, that was the self-titled one was like a big one. And it was same kind of thing, right? There was this like indie world that is now getting more electronic and not something again that I thought I would like. The only band that I can think of at that point in time that used like electronic beats or like,
And I wonder if I'm thinking of who you're going to say. Can I guess?
yes, yeah.
Is it Radiohead?
No, I didn't like Radiohead until I was like well into, I was probably like 18, 19.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I
Gotcha.
think, I didn't get Radiohead at all until probably in Rainbows actually.
Oh, wow.
And then I was like, oh, I never like something clicked. And then I went back and I was like,
I have
yep.
hot takes on that record too, man. We'll get there someday.
Okay. I'm very curious.
What was the band you were thinking of?
Refused.
Okay, gotcha. I'm not familiar.
Oh yeah, so I mean, like they're like a heavy punk band.
Cool.
They have an album called "The Shape of Punk to Come," that is like genuinely, I think, one of the greatest punk albums ever written.
And it's synthy?
They have weird moments, like it's all over the place. Like there's songs that start with like stand-up bass and like jazz drums, and then
Love
like
it.
it just gets into like the heaviest shit. That's like complex time signatures, but like easy enough to wrap your head around. There's like really fast stuff. There's like slower stuff that's really heavy, but it doesn't feel like tough guy stuff.
Yeah.
And they're also like super anti-capitalist, which like for me, being like a 16-year-old kid, hearing like some guy just being like, you know,
Yeah.
the system is set up to rob you. I'm like, oh shit, okay.
Yeah, like, awesome.
Yeah. So I don't know.
I mean, look at where we're at in 2025 with our. He was right.
I can listen to that record still and just be like, no, yeah, it still relates, which is unfortunate, but it's the truth.
You know, what's funny is I actually took a note here about talking about placing Picaresque in its moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
The single from Picaresque was
Yeah.
16 Military Wives, right?
Right.
And that song is like sort of a satire, I guess, about the 24-hour news cycle during the Iraq War, like post 9/11 24-hour news cycle.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna pull up those.
Another
lyrics.
insane thing for a pop record to have a song about, especially in that time, I guess. But like, it's funny. It's tongue in cheek. It's incisive, and it's so catchy. And the music video for it was very like Rushmore.
Yeah, very
inspired.
much. Yeah.
And it just felt like there was like a joy to that song, despite the heaviness of the lyrics that was particularly unique to that period of time. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that song is as powerful today as it was in 2025 or in 2005 rather. Just because of that, like, you know, back then talking about like how the 24-hour news cycle was affecting popular opinion. Like was relatively fresh, because back then the conversation was like they have to create content to fill 24 hours of airtime.
Right.
And so what are they telling us that is or is not appropriate or true? And like, again, 20 years on, you know, who's to say? But I do think that's worth mentioning just because of how sort of prescient that conversation was surrounding that song at the time.
Yeah. I do feel like that was something that was reserved for like punk rock at that time and not really reserved for the indie folk scene. So like,
Yeah.
and especially on this album to have something that's like pretty politically charged and like not really too, like, there is that level of theater to this song still, but it's not as overt as like the rest of the songs. Like, it's just like, it's a pretty just like, hey America, look at yourself right now kind of song.
Totally. Yeah. And like and it's talking about how like I don't know the words. I shouldn't even like attempt to like go on record.
I've got them on. I've got them up. So
good. So you would definitely know if I screwed them up then.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like, but it's like, 15 cannibal kings or 16 cannibal kings wondering blithely what the dinner bell will bring. Like, pretty incredible line that is like is very silly. And like, what is he talking about? I think the satire of it is that he could be talking about any number of things.
Yeah.
That could be looked at as like a nonsense news story, but obviously, like, what are the cannibals waiting to eat? It's probably someone. And then is there humor in who they're eating or what they're eating or why they're eating it or whatever? It's just like, it's layered and it's nuanced, and it's of its time in a really unique way.
Yeah, I do feel like a lot of that stuff still applies today. Like, it feels still relevant. This kind of critique of, I don't know, it's like, it's kind of like subtly, but not so subtly, talking about the greed that's within the American political system. And
absolutely.
And I think that's like so apparent now that it's like hard to not see that. But at the time, we were focused on, freedom fries and apple pies, and like, we didn't know, like, like
that's right. Yeah, I think I think you're like a shade younger than me, if I'm not mistaken. But like, I feel like 9/11 occurred like my first week of high school. And so I was 15 years old, and it happened like the first week of high school, and the whole world changed. It changed for everybody, right? Yeah. But like, I have this thing where I'm like, I know the world changed, but also, did it change because I started high school at the same time?
Right.
Like, and like, you're becoming 15, you're starting to be around people who are older than you, who maybe have political opinions, who are expressing themselves in different ways than you've been around people doing before. Yeah. And on top of that, there was like this new, 24-hour news cycle. There was 9/11. There was threat of war. So the world kind of changed in like a significant way, personally, but also obviously actually at that time. And so I think that you're right. I think punk bands were the ones who were probably saying anything really meaningful about it at the time. I saw Anti-Flag around that time at First Avenue.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Going nuts. Like, I remember the guy saying, like, people ask, like, if I'm glad what happened to America. And I'll tell you, I'm not glad, but I'm also not surprised. Yeah. And I was thinking to myself, like, I'm 15. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, that's crazy. That's a crazy thing to say. Yeah. Just like having your mind blown by these like sort of like next level political ideals. It was like a really fun thing, fun sort of in air quotes, to like experience around the early 2000s when there was like interesting art being made, when like Bright Eyes was doing like When the President Talks to God. Yeah.
Right? I remember downloading. I paid the $1.29 or whatever on iTunes to get that song. Yeah. And like, again, like, I was listening to a lot of punk rock, and like, anything from like, Blink-182 level pop punk to like, there was a band I was really into called The Virus, who was like, just hardcore punk rock. Like, right on. Yeah. And like, there was politics being talked about, but to hear like somebody as like a folk singer, and I hadn't gotten into Bob Dylan obviously at this point or anything like that, and that's like a very Dylan-esque song, but to just like very blatantly be like, yeah, like this is fucked. Totally. And it was like that, and there was a compilation of punk bands called Rock Against Bush. Okay. I think, and it was like literally just like 20 something bands that all wrote a song for these compilations. There's two of them, and like 4 of these compilations, and there would just be like anti-war and anti what's happening in the government, and like that stuff informed me in such a weird way that like I feel like now people are getting from like TikTok, honestly, or like social media.
Yeah, streaming shows. Like
we didn't have that, you know?
And like subversive storytelling, like what exists on Picaresque, is like probably I'm going to use a term like one of the best, most thoughtful ways to like indoctrinate like our age of young person about the dangers of war or the dangers of like misused media.
Yeah.
Or, you know, things like that. Like, I think it's such a smart song.
It's brilliant.
It's so good. And I was reading, I didn't know about this. Like, we talk about the Decemberists sort of being like this like old timey throwback thing. Certainly at the time felt that way, but like that music video was the first music video ever shared on BitTorrent.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
Or released on BitTorrent exclusively or something like that. Whoa. Like that was part of how they marketed it. So you think about like this like old band that sort of was like under the guise of like an old timey thing,
right?
Doing something as like with as much forethought of releasing music videos on BitTorrent.
Yeah.
In 2005 is like, holy shit.
Yeah, like, for sure.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, and I do think that they kind of paved the way for what would eventually kind of branch into a lot of different indie folk stuff. So like, you know, there is like the Mumford and Sons Lumineers aspect of that would branched out and did get very popular. But there's also, you know, there's a lot of like really earnest indie folk artists that probably wouldn't have gained popularity if not for this album blowing up in the way that it did.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I mean, like Iron and Wine was probably around that time.
Mm-hmm. The Shins.
I would love the Shins. I was a huge Shins fan.
Yeah.
Sufjan Stevens, I loved. Illinois is probably my favorite record of all time.
Wow.
Like, I feel like I've felt that way for years, like to the point where I feel comfortable saying it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
Like, but I do think that's probably my favorite record also from 2005.
It's an incredible record. Holy shit. I mean, I love Sufjan. I think he's just incredible. And the fact that he can still put out a record like Javelin was...
You were going nuts on social media about Javelin when it came out. I remember I saw you talking about it and I was like, dude loves Javelin.
Yeah, I think that record's incredible. And like... I loved Carrie and Lowell too. Like, I think Carrie and Lowell was the first one since Illinois where I was like, oh yeah, like he's still got it. Like, there it is. And Javelin felt like a mix between those two albums to me, kind of in a way.
I get that. I think I just put something together, and part of the reason I think that I love Illinois is because Illinois, and this is will tie it all together. Mm-hmm. Illinois also features like a humor to it. Yeah. There's a silliness in Illinois that I don't know if he really explores, like certainly not on Javelin, which if you look into the background of Javelin, the saddest shit ever.
Yes.
Carrie and Lowell, the saddest shit ever.
Yes.
Like at this point in time, when Sufjan comes out with a new record, I almost like wince because I'm like, what horrible thing did he experience now?
That poor man.
Oh, that poor guy. And, like I hope he's well. But Illinois had like that song Decatur, which was like sort of silly and like funny, and all of like the Come On Feel the Illinois song where he's listing like, you know, he's talking about the Chicago World's Fair, and it's again just doing it in a really incisive, creative way that made me as a 18-year-old at the time go like, or I guess 17 at the time, be like, oh my God, you can be earnest and funny.
Yeah. I mean, the song about John Wayne Gacy Jr. is heartbreaking, but it's also like funny when you think about the context that he's singing it in.
It's that I actively decided not to mention that song because it's such a confusing
thing. It's really a trip because you're just like, I remember really struggling because like I was like, I want to put this on a burned CD so bad, but I also don't want people to think that like I'm a fucking weirdo.
Totally. And that's like, or like, is it a novelty song? I mean, like, you could argue that it's a novelty song.
Yeah.
Like it's about a serial killer, and so like in that essence, it's sort of silly or something. But like the story of it is so appalling and so atrocious and so dark that like part of you has to look at it and just be like, you almost kind of have to like shake your head and be like, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a trip to like, to listen to it and then think about the context of what he's singing about. You're just like, there's such a weird, it's almost like sympathizing with him in like,
I think that's it. Yeah.
In like such a strange way that like, I don't know, like making a human out of a monster kind of thing, where it's like, do we want to do that?
Yeah. Well, it's exactly, I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting conversations that can be had about obviously that song, certainly that song, but also with, you know, the death and the macabre that exists on Picaresque.
Yeah.
Like, the song We Both Go Down Together is about a couple.
I love that song.
Gets pregnant out of wedlock, and I believe he's like a rich, wealthy man, and she's a poor street woman, and they decide to commit suicide together.
Right.
And it's like very like, you know, it's very Dickensian, very tragic, very whatever.
Yeah.
But it's like the funnest pop song ever.
It really, I mean, like, it's a banger.
No, dude, it is. And I took a note here, and I like, next time you listen to this record, Picaresque, I feel like every song was recorded like 1% too fast.
Yeah, sure.
Like, just like listen to We Both Go Down Together and just hear like everyone's kind of rushing in like a way where you kind of want to be like, naturally, you'd probably want them to take their time on it a little bit more. But the record sounds energetic because they're playing at the speed that they're playing at.
It's true. There's a liveliness to it.
Totally. The Sporting Life, that Lust for Life drum beat is like, again, just like 1% too fast. And I like, obviously that's super subjective, but like my set, like it would be the kind of thing where like, if you were a band director at a high school and you heard the band like playing at that, you'd be like, guys, let's all take a breath before we start the song this time. It sounds good. We know our parts.
Just pump the brakes a little.
Just totally. And like, but it's such a part of the charm of that record to me is like that. I think that when Rachel Bloomberg left the band as the drummer, like they just locked into something that feels a little bit more modern rock.
Yes. Certainly.
And that to me is some of the charm that kind of went away. But yeah, it's a playful, awesome, beautifully fully realized aesthetic statement, Picaresque, and I love it dearly.
It's a beautiful record.
Hell
yeah. On that note, is there anything else that you wanted to say just about the Decemberists or this album?
No, I think I've said it all. I really like. I've said a lot.
No, that's great.
I think that like I hope someday Colin Malloy can capture the magic again. And that sounds derisive. I don't know. But I guess I just hope that maybe what I want is I can someday listen to the Decemberists again and feel the joy that I once felt again.
Sure.
If that makes sense. Maybe I'm the thing that's changed.
Yeah, it's hard when you have like a nostalgic connection to a specific album too, though, you know, like that puts a specific album like kind of on a pedestal a little bit. And sometimes that's just like, it's a hard thing to match because it's this, I don't know, you're trying to get this feeling back of that you had in that moment, which is like such a unique and singular experience, which is a beautiful thing to hold on to, I think.
Well, I think that's what makes records magic. That's what makes art magic. But like, you know, I'm sure that everybody who has come on your show and who has been thoughtful about which one they want to talk about, has felt some degree of magic. Not everything can be maladroit.
Not everything. That's right.
And so
that's what I keep telling myself. It just
not everything can be maladroit. And I hope if you take this and your listeners take that into the future as they're pursuing their own art and quietly remind themselves that not everything can be Weezer's 2002 follow-up to the Green Album, maladroit.
If there's one thing to take away from this entire episode, it would be that. Yeah. All right. Well, Andy, thank you so much. That was a great pick. Thank you for reminding me how much I love this album again.
Oh yeah. Hell yeah.
And thanks again for being a musician's musician.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you.
Yep.